Back to Kentucky. Central Kentucky has a growing illegal immigration population.
Oh, right.
What would you do to address this issue?
Well, when I was in the military, I was in the war on drugs. And we would patrol the Caribbean, and we would stop ships and board those ships and check for drugs. But the way we did that is the military would always stay behind the scenes. We would provide a way for the Coast Guard to board those ships. So law enforcement and military should remain separate. Law enforcement, you generally say freeze, and if they don't, you shoot. Military generally shoots and asks questions later. They're very different training, very different mindsets. You don't want the military directly on the border. You don't want that influence of drugs to impact our military. But what we can do is what we did in the Navy. Use the National Guard. And with the National Guard, put a law enforcement detachment. So the National Guard is there for backup, but the law enforcement detachment goes and does the arrests and prosecutes the illegal immigration. So patrol the border using our National Guard resources and law enforcement. Keep the two separate. Don't want to combine those two. I know some advocate putting the military on the border. I do not agree with that because there's too much drug money that could influence our military. We don't want that. I think the other thing we do is defense and certainly unmanned aerial vehicles. We have plenty of unmanned aerial technology and vehicles that can be used to help identify people crossing our border illegally. We just need to have the will to do it. And I'm for giving illegal immigrants one thing for free. That's a ride home. Other than that, they should not get health care. They should not get anything else. A ride home as quick as we can send them home. The fact is, being in America is an honor. It needs to be earned, just like everybody else who's come here.
Quickly, as we wrap up here too, I wanted to ask, one of the growing popular things within Kentucky issues is term limits.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of supporters of term limits.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I support term limits. I believe I'm the only candidate who has actually committed to only running 2 terms, regardless of whether there's legislation that is passed. I think the reality is a lot of politicians run on term limits because it's a popular thing to run on. The reality is it's a very difficult thing to pass because you got people who've been up there for a long time, and it's probably not something they'll ever get through anytime soon. But that doesn't mean you can't impose self-term limits, and that's what I'm going to do. 2 terms is long enough. There's plenty of very capable people in Kentucky who can go and serve in the United States Senate. It shouldn't be a career path. It should be serve and come home.
So if you run, you're elected through the primary, through the general election, you will serve 2 terms.
2 terms and I'm done. And during those 2 terms, my responsibility is just like it was in business, to develop people who can come and replace me. We have plenty of capable people. Give them a chance. You know, they try to keep ordinary people out of politics. We talked about money earlier. We talked about all these different ways to keep the grassroots from rising up. I think tax-exempt status is another way in which they control organizations from becoming involved. And we're buying into all of this, the media. So I think there's plenty of capable people. 2 terms is long enough for anybody in the Senate. 12 years.
Quickly, as I wrap up, I have to ask this because you drove through, how many, is it 2 feet of snow to get here?
Well, it wasn't 2 feet of snow,
today?
but it was
quite a lot of global warming, right?
well, global warming. Yeah, you know, burr. It's pretty cold outside. I don't know where the global warming is. If it was here, I wish we had some of it. I need to go start my car and just let it run so we get more carbon dioxide. But you know, there's several agencies that again have become politically correct around global warming. The Environmental Protection Agency, they've classified CO2, the very thing we exhale, the very thing that our plant life needs, as a pollutant. Now I agree, there's a lot of stuff that comes out of the mouths of people in Washington that are pollutants, but CO2 is not one of them. So the EPA has $10.5 billion annual budget, an increase of 35% over last year. 17,445 full-time equivalents in just the EPA, so they can classify CO2 as a pollutant. And there's no linkage between CO2 and the temperature of the planet. So the EPA is another government agency that's simply out of control and needs to be significantly reduced. Those responsibilities to protect the environment, many of them should come back to the state. There are some roles of the federal government for pollutants that might cross between the states. But the Department of Interior is another government agency that's standing in the way of developing our energy resources, just as the EPA is. So, no, I'm not buying into global warming. I think we need to build power plants. We need to mine for coal. We need to drill for oil. We need to build refineries. and we need to build nuclear power plants. So in spite of these politically correct government agencies saying that wind and solar is the answer, there are uses for wind and solar, but they will not power the core load of this country. And solar is one of the most expensive forms of energy. So let's get back to fossil fuels, let's get back to nuclear, let's forget about global warming, and when it warms up outside, I'll be thankful.
Well, to segue from that, cap and trade was some legislation that was passed in the House and is currently in the Senate. If you were sitting in the Senate right now representing Kentucky and it came up for a vote, how would you vote?
I'd vote no.
And why?
And because it's a tax on energy. It's going to do nothing but line the pockets of these carbon traders. It's not going to solve any problem. A lot of the polluting is happening overseas in China and India and other countries. It's not being caused by America. So cap and trade is a bad idea. Energy tax is a bad idea. Now the Environmental Protection Agency, because cap and trade may or may not pass, I hope it doesn't, are now trying to say CO2 is a pollutant so they can still regulate it that way, even without the legislation. So that's how the EPA is trying to still regulate carbon emissions, even before cap and trade. So the government is actually working against us. They're working against our prosperity, they're working against our economic growth, they're working against our energy companies, and I've been saying since last summer that energy prices are going to increase. Oil's up to, I think, $80 a barrel. Gas prices are coming up again. And when the economy does take off, everybody's going to be wondering, why haven't we addressed the energy needs of this country? Because we have done nothing to become more energy independent than what we were 3 or 4 years ago when gas prices were very expensive. The political correctness is stopping us from growing this country around energy.
Well, proponents of the cap and trade, especially candidates within your race, would say that it would create jobs for Kentucky.
Well, I'd ask if they ever created a job in their life. What jobs have they created? Have they ever worked for an energy company? What basis do they have to make that claim? How can increasing taxes create jobs? That's complete and utter nonsense. The only jobs that'll create is jobs for the, well, they are right, it'll create jobs for the government. So I guess if that's what they're thinking, their basic notion is it's going to create jobs, well, for who? For the government. And you and I are going to pay for them. They're not going to be private sector jobs. It's going to destroy private sector jobs. And it's going to make our energy costs go way up. So even Barack Obama admitted that energy prices would necessarily skyrocket, I believe was his terms, under cap and trade. This is a way to destroy energy companies.
All right. Well, one last question.
Sure.
Is there anything that Kentuckians need to know about Bill Johnson? Any skeletons in your closet? Anything in your past that you want to get out right now?
Well, no, there's no skeletons. I'm just an ordinary guy out trying to represent the state. I think this election is going to come down to trust. Who do the voters trust? That they are saying the things that they truly believe. And I would ask the voters of Kentucky to look at our resumes. Whenever you interview for a job, one of the first questions you get asked is, tell me a little bit about yourself. They ask you that because they want to know about your past experiences, your past accomplishments, your past decisions, because those are often very similar to what you will do in the future. Instead, we listen to the rhetoric and don't examine a person in depth in terms of what they've accomplished in their past. So look at our resumes, compare our backgrounds. I'll stand with pride on my background, and I hope the other candidates will as well. But I'm just a grassroots guy trying to serve the state and come back home.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Again, I'm Mica Sims, sitting down with Bill Johnson. I encourage you to come back and look at the candidates and their answers. I'll be sitting down with many of them, asking pretty much all of the same questions. So compare the answers and find out the candidate that you want to support and get out to the polls. Thank you.